In the early 19th century, religious life in the United States was intertwined with the very organization of daily life. In rural villages and expanding cities, the week was marked by the rhythm of agricultural work, artisan workshops, small family businesses, and long distances traveled on horseback or on foot. Faith did not occupy a space separate from ordinary life. It manifested itself in nightly readings by lamplight, in conversations after dinner, in community gatherings held in barns, makeshift schools, or living rooms. It was in this simple, fragmented, and intensely local environment that religious groups frequently formed, dissolved, and reorganized. Among these groups, those who would later be called Adventists did not emerge as a structured church. They began as ordinary people who shared similar concerns, especially the attempt to understand the historical time in which they lived. Farmers, teachers, merchants, and housewives read the Bible with methodical attention, exchanged letters, pamphlets, and religious newspapers, and participated in open meetings where ideas were debated without a defined hierarchy. The expectation of Christ's return, widely discussed during this period, was not exclusive to them, but it served as a point of convergence for many of these attentive readers of the Scriptures. The initial influence of William Miller helped to bring cohesion to this scattered movement. Miller did not organize a church nor establish a closed doctrinal system. He traveled, preached, and published prophetic calculations that circulated widely. When his chronological expectations were not met in 1844, the impact was profound. Many abandoned the idea altogether, others returned to their original denominations, and a small group remained united more by bonds of shared experience than by theological consensus. This later period was marked by silence, resumed daily work, and long individual reflections. The organization of faith among these remnants occurred gradually and practically. In the early years, there was no immediate concern with defining formal creeds. What existed were regular meetings for Bible reading, simple prayer, and frank discussion. Authority was not centralized in one leader, but distributed among those recognized for their experience, teaching ability, and perceived character. The absence of fixed structures also reflected a common distrust of the period towards rigid religious institutions, seen as distant from people's real lives. Homes served as informal religious centers. Families hosted small groups, organized meals, and accommodated visitors from other regions. Letters became essential organizational tools. They recounted experiences, described ongoing doctrinal debates, and helped maintain a sense of unity among people who rarely met in person. Religious newspapers, printed in modest runs, broadened this reach and created a continuous communication network. In this context, figures such as James Joseph Bates, they came to play important organizational roles. They were not leaders in the modern institutional sense, but facilitators. They coordinated publications, encouraged regional meetings, and helped mediate disagreements. Faith was organized less by decrees and more by progressive consensus, built over repeated conversations and shared experiences. Camp meetings, common in 19th-century American religious culture, also influenced how these groups were structured. Outdoor gatherings, held over several days, brought together entire families. Beyond religious moments, these meetings functioned as social spaces where practical decisions were made. There, the need to financially support publications, to support itinerant preachers, and to establish minimum standards of cooperation were discussed. The organization of faith emerged as a response to concrete needs, not as an abstract project. The presence of Ellen G. White fits into this scenario as a historical record of shared experiences and perceptions. Their writings circulated among the groups as expanded letters, describing meetings, internal challenges, and observations about collective behavior. They did not replace the Bible, nor end debates, but they influenced how many understood the historical moment and the practical responsibilities involved in community life. Over the decades, the need for greater coordination led to the gradual creation of more defined structures. The establishment of publishing associations, the organization of local conferences, and later, a formal denomination, were steps taken cautiously. Each institutional advance was accompanied by intense debates about freedom of conscience and original simplicity. Faith, previously lived in an almost exclusively domestic and relational way, began to acquire administrative contours. This process did not eliminate the tension between spontaneity and organization, it merely shifted it to new arenas. The way in which 19th-century Adventists organized their faith reveals a continuous effort to balance personal convictions, community life, and the practical demands of a growing movement, paving the way for transformations that would become more visible in the following years. As the years progressed after the 1850s, the daily lives of those groups who identified as Adventists began to take on a more coordinated rhythm. Families continued to live simply, maintaining farms, workshops, small schools, and local businesses. But now there was a growing sense of belonging to something that transcended the limits of the immediate neighborhood. Letters continued to arrive by mail, newspapers circulated more regularly, and news of meetings in other regions created a feeling of historical continuity. Faith remained integrated into daily life, without rigid distinctions between the domestic space, work, and religious moments. The observance of the Sabbath, gradually adopted by these groups, began to function as an organizing element of time. The end of the work week brought practical changes to the routine, influencing schedules, business relationships, and family habits. This choice did not arise as a central imposition, but as a result of shared Bible readings and prolonged debates. The adoption of the Sabbath required concrete adjustments and contributed to strengthening collective identity, as it marked a visible difference in relation to the social environment. Even so, each family dealt with these adaptations according to their local circumstances. With the growing number of followers, the circulation of publications became essential. Small, often improvised printing presses operated in homes or sheds. The constant sound of hand presses was part of the daily environment in places like Battle Creek, where editorial work blended with domestic life. The publication of periodicals served not only to disseminate ideas, but also to record collective decisions, report on meetings, and maintain a shared memory. Printed paper became a material link between geographically dispersed communities. During this period, the notion of leadership remained practical and functional. People recognized for their experience assumed specific responsibilities, such as managing resources, editing newspapers, or organizing regional meetings. There was still no clear separation between clergy and laity. Many of those who preached also cultivated the land, rode at night, or traveled long distances in difficult conditions. Authority was built on prolonged interaction and mutual trust, not on formal titles. Meetings called conferences began to emerge as a response to the need for coordination. They brought together representatives from different localities to discuss administrative issues, resource allocation, and support for common activities. These assemblies were simple, held in borrowed spaces, with long sessions of conversation and deliberation. Decisions were rarely made hastily. Consensus was sought even when it meant prolonging debates for days. This method reflected a culture that valued collective participation and institutional caution. Health and body care have also come to occupy an increasingly important place in Adventist daily life. Influenced by health reforms widely discussed in the 19th century, many have adopted specific dietary practices and more moderate lifestyles. The emergence of initiatives such as the future Battle Creek Sanitarium originated from practical concerns about well-being, work, and longevity. These projects were not isolated from faith, but integrated into the vision of an ordered and responsible life that the group sought to cultivate. The writings of Ellen G. White. These texts continued to circulate in this context as records of observations and practical advice. Many dealt with domestic organization, interpersonal relationships, and administrative challenges faced by communities. They were read together, discussed, and compared with lived experience. They did not replace collective deliberation, but they influenced the tone of decisions, especially when it came to maintaining a balance between growth and simplicity. As activities multiplied, the need for a more stable financial system became evident. Support for publications, travel, and health initiatives required regular contributions. Donation models were openly discussed, always with concern for avoiding coercion. The financial organization was seen as a tool to sustain collective work, not as an end in itself. Transparency and accountability were recurring themes in meetings and journals. Even with these advances, the feeling of provisionality remained strong. Many still saw the organization as something functional and temporary, necessary only to deal with immediate demands. There was a fear that rigid structures could distance the movement from its simple origins. This tension shaped important decisions and prevented The result was an organization that grew cautiously, always anchored in the daily lives of the ordinary people who sustained it. By the end of the 1860s, Adventists were no longer just a collection of isolated groups, but a community with a shared memory, recognizable practices, and basic mechanisms of coordination, preparing the ground for broader structural changes that would soon become inevitable. In the 1870s, Adventist daily life began to encompass a broader scale of relationships. The advancement of railroads shortened distances that previously required weeks of travel, and letters now circulated with greater predictability. This new rhythm of communication directly affected how the faith was organized. Local decisions remained important, but they were no longer sufficient to handle initiatives that spanned entire states. Ordinary life remained simple, but the collective horizon expanded. The need for clearer coordination led to the formalization of administrative structures. The creation of General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. This represented a conscious attempt to organize responsibilities without losing its participatory character. This structure did not emerge as a distant authority, but as a mechanism linking local associations. Decisions continued to be debated in assemblies, with representatives chosen by their communities, reflecting a culture that valued consensus and accountability. Even with this formalization, the daily work of the leaders retained practical characteristics. Many traveled long distances in uncomfortable conditions. staying in members' homes or modest boarding houses. Administrative meetings took place alongside shared meals and informal conversations. There was no clear separation between time dedicated to the organization and time dedicated to fellowship. Organized faith was expressed both in
the written records of meetings and in everyday gestures of hospitality and cooperation. The expansion of publications continued to play a central role. Printing presses became intense work environments, where typesetters, editors, and proofreaders worked side by side. The regularity of periodicals helped create a common language and record administrative decisions. Theological debates in travelogues. These printed records formed a living archive of collective experience, allowing distant communities to share similar references and follow the development of the movement. The emergence of educational institutions marked another step in the organization of faith. Schools began modestly, often in adapted buildings, with simple curricula focused on reading, writing, and practical training. Education was seen as a natural extension of community life, preparing young people for work and active participation in society. These initiatives required planning, financial resources, and supervision, further increasing the need for stable administrative structures. During this period, the relationship between organization and individual freedom remained a recurring theme. There were open discussions about the limits of institutional authority and the risk of excessive bureaucratization. Many expressed concern that formalization could stifle the personal experience that had characterized the early years. These debates were not merely theoretical. They were reflected in practical decisions, such as the autonomy of local associations and the rotation of administrative positions. The writings of Ellen G. White, they continue to be consulted as historical records of the time. In letters and articles, she described meetings, trips, and challenges faced by leaders. Her texts frequently drew attention to the need for a balance between efficient organization and human care. They circulated along with minutes and reports, forming a documentary collection that influenced the collective memory of the period. Financial organization also became more sophisticated. Reporting systems, budgets, and audits began to be discussed to handle the increased resources involved. The central concern was ensuring that contributions were used transparently and in line with collective decisions. Financial management was not seen as a secondary task, but as an integral part of community responsibility, requiring specific skills and mutual trust. Despite these changes, the daily lives of ordinary members remained marked by simple routines. Farmers continued to tend their land, artisans maintained workshops, and families gathered at the end of the day for reading and conversation. The broader organization rarely interfered directly with these daily practices. It functioned as a backdrop, offering support and general direction, while the experience of faith remained integrated into everyday life. As the 19th century drew to a close, Adventists found themselves in a unique position. They had developed recognizable administrative structures, maintained a network of institutions, and largely preserved the participatory culture of their early years. This combination of everyday simplicity and increasing coordination created new possibilities and new challenges, preparing the movement to face even more profound transformations in the social and religious landscape that lay ahead. In the last decades of the 19th century, the organization of the Adventist faith was already part of the backdrop of daily life for thousands of people scattered throughout the United States. In many communities, belonging to the group was perceived in a calm and practical way. Families continued their routines of work, raising children, and social interaction, now supported by institutions that had become familiar. Schools, publishing houses, and health centers were not seen as distant structures, but as natural extensions of a network built over years of gradual cooperation. Daily life maintained its characteristic simplicity. Mornings began early with household chores and manual labor, while evenings often ended in quiet reading or family conversation. Adventist newspapers continued to arrive by mail, bringing news of meetings, administrative reports, and reflections on practical matters of community life. These publications not only informed but also helped maintain a sense of historical continuity, connecting generations that had not lived through the movement's early uncertain years. The organizational structure, more defined during this period, functioned in a relatively discrete manner. Local conferences dealt with immediate matters, while broader decisions were discussed in national assemblies. For the average member, these bodies rarely interfered directly with daily routines. They manifested themselves indirectly through the standardization of publications, the coordination of schools, and support for initiatives that benefited entire communities. The organization had become a stable tool, integrated into daily life. The growth of educational institutions brought about noticeable changes. Young people who previously had limited access to formal education began attending schools run by the group. These environments combined basic academic instruction with practical training, reflecting values widely shared in American society at the time. The presence of these schools altered individual trajectories and contributed to the consolidation of a more lasting collective identity, based not only on beliefs but also on shared life experiences. At the same time, institutional expansion brought new challenges. The increase in the number of employees, teachers, administrators, and healthcare professionals demanded clearer rules, contracts, and defined responsibilities. Labor, financial, and administrative issues began to occupy an increasingly prominent place in discussions. These concerns were handled cautiously, always accompanied by debates on how to, amidst uncertainties. This awareness prevented absolute trust in the structures and kept alive the idea that the organization existed to serve daily life and not the other way around. Thus, the way Adventists organized their faith throughout the 19th century reveals a gradual process, marked by successive adaptations to the real needs of the communities. It was not a linear path nor free of tensions, but a constant effort to reconcile personal convictions, collective life, and practical demands. By the end of the century, this form of organization was sufficiently established to withstand new challenges, without completely erasing the marks of its simple and relational origin, opening space for transformations that would continue to unfold in the following century.